Good afternoon. I'd like to get started on time. Respect everyone's time. You are in Emerald 1, extreme weather. I'm your moderator, Jonathan Wood. We have two speakers this afternoon. They'll answer some questions after each presentation. Please check your cell phones for vibrator mute, and we'd like to get started. Our first presentation is on Forestry BMPs for extreme weather with Steve Roberge. Steve is the University of Vermont, or New Hampshire, sorry, I'm home. University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension Forestry Specialist. In his role, he oversees a system of county foresters, coordinates research to forest landowners and professionals, and implements the state's forest stewardship program. His primary role is to transfer research to forest landowners and natural resource professionals. He chairs the the New Hampshire Forester Licensing Board and serves on the New Hampshire Forest Advisory Board. Serves as the chair of the U.S. Forest Service Region 9 Cooperative Forest Management Committee. Steve earned his BS in Forest Science from the University of New Hampshire and a Master's of Forest Science from Yale University. At home, Steve tends to his maple taps every spring and thinks about trees every day. Please welcome Steve Roberge.
Yeah, good afternoon. That last line in my bio is a legacy of just what I do to general public. I think we all think about trees every day, right? Hooray. And I'll let the Vermont thing slide because, we'll just, we'll leave it at that. So this is a talk about really, I'm not a logger, I'm not a machine operator, but I'm an extension forester, and extension foresters and extension in general are really great at laundering questions and laundering information from a single person to the to an audience like this. And so a lot of these examples come from loggers and contractors and foresters who've demonstrated this work out in the landscape in New Hampshire, share their information, and I think it's just a good collection all in one spot for you all to kind of take in, consider, and maybe take some back with you, or maybe this will spark some ideas. So by far not the end-all be-all of kind of BMPs to consider in these conditions, but just some examples to go through and just some things to think about as you're moving through planning a harvest on a tricky site or planning a harvest, say, during a winter like this winter. So because I always forget to do acknowledgements at the end, I put them up front. This is really a legacy of the work of our forest industry specialist who retired, Sarah Smith at Extension, with a forest legacy, a forest landscape restoration grant that we got probably about maybe 8 years ago, I believe it was, 2017 or so. But it was a collaboration between partners in New Hampshire, UNH Extension, Timberland Landowners Association, and the Division of Forest and Lands. There's a document that's up there right now, Emergency Erosion control techniques for dealing with severe weather conditions during active timber harvest. That document the final draft was completed by James Frone, Cooperative Extension Forester, and also Karen Bennett, the State Extension Forester, who's since retired. That copy is located at nhwoods.org. That's our website, and then many photos and contributions to foresters and loggers. So thank you all for helping out with that. I'm just really the messenger of this document and have added as we've gone on since this was published in 2019. So I'm going to focus on New Hampshire because that's where I work, and I don't know the laws, rules, or BMPs that are required in your other states, but they're pretty much, I think they're fairly similar, but this is very New Hampshire focused for obvious reasons. But best management practices minimize the effects of logging on water quality and site productivity. That's how we define it in New Hampshire. So essentially, it prevents erosion. You want to keep soil where it is. You want to maintain the hydrology of the site. You don't want to change how water moves across the surface or how water moves below the surface as well. It keeps water clean, catches sediments. It maintains the productivity of the site. When you don't disturb the soil, you don't disturb the functionality of that soil, and it maintains the productivity. And most importantly, it keeps us working in the woods. If we're out there making messes all the time, if we're out there putting sediment into streams, that's going to come back to bite us as a profession. So following in BMPs is, obviously what we try to do and strive for. And so we have kind of in New Hampshire a document that was written in 2016 or updated in 2016. Those are what we call our standard BMPs. They're extremely effective, especially during normal circumstances. But as we've experienced changing winters, severe weather events, heavy rainstorms, our BMPs are kind of put to the test, and there needs to be some thought about how we lay out sales, how we think about where we're going to go, where and when we go with machinery. And so there's a number of kind of reports and data that's collected. The Hubbard Brook in New Hampshire has 60 plus years of data that shows our winters are getting shorter. There's less snow cover. Less snow cover can mean earlier thaws. It can also mean that the frost drives deeper down to the soil when it is freezing. So there's all these things that we're experiencing of extreme weather. We've had the experience, we're experiencing it now, and we will into the future. So the kind of neat thing, in New Hampshire, we did some BMP analysis in 2005 and also in 2000, sorry, I lost my place there, 2005 and 2016, sorry. And it turns out they work out. So the BMPs that you implement, essentially the closeout conditions that you do out there, and at least in New Hampshire, they work very well. And so following BMPs is a good idea. So let's continue to use the manual that's out there, continue to use BMPs, and then think of other ones we can incorporate over time. So increasingly, we kind of know the stories. This may look like your winter harvest this year, but we have open winters, little to no snow, freezing and thawing, and sometimes no freezing at all, right? And these are kind of the results that you can see here. Large ruts and just issues with skid trails and haul roads. And the summertime is no different though too. So what is seemingly kind of what we would say is stable landings or stable haul roads, a 4-inch rainstorm can cause some pretty severe gullying, sedimentation, or even just the movement, the creep of a flat landing down slope. Even if it seems to be flat, it will find a way to go. And so the picture on your left there is a seemingly flat landing, very sandy, well drained, but you hit that with 3-4 inches of rain and things start to move. So we need to think about how we leave these things when we leave a site. So again, we have this document based upon this changing weather that we're experiencing and the severe conditions that we're seeing out there in the woods. So this was developed with these partners listed below. And so I just want to be clear that the extreme BMP manual or document that's out there is not to replace BMPs in New Hampshire, and I would say not to replace BMPs in your own state too. It's meant to augment it. So this is my favorite graphic here of that. So you put these two together, thumbs up, everyone's happy. And so we should consider using the techniques in the new document and the extreme BMP document with traditional ones during the harvest, before closeout, using these measures as a temporary closeout. If you have to move off site because there is a large storm coming through on frozen ground, rain on snow is like a new thing that we're dealing with, or it's much more common. And then also as final closeout conditions too, because like I said, BMPs work, traditional BMPs work, but again, some of them may not hold up to extreme weather events, and so we may actually need to bump up our closeout efforts. So it's all about planning, and it's planning for the unpredictable, and that's, that can be kind of hard, right? It really comes down to knowing your harvest area, knowing where you're working, and also the contractor too that you're working with to kind of know the headache spots, the pitfalls. The idea is having a lot of material on hand. I've been seeing a lot more timber mats showing up on landings, and I think we're going to see a lot more adoption of timber mats into the future as we get conditions like we had this winter. Just because they're handy, you can move them, and you don't have to gobble up pulpwood or other material to actually lay that down to make a good surface. It's like anytime, I remember I was a consulting forester in Connecticut, whenever I saw a silt fence, I knew something was up or something was wrong, and so usually the silt fence was like the last line of the fence. But having these on hand are great, and they can be an option and a very helpful one if things go south. And so having that in the utility trailer, in the truck, as just a backup plan. So, and then finally, slash and corduroy. I propose kind of building up stashes of this material throughout the harvest. If it's slash and it's not used, it just turns out into a nice brush pile. If it's corduroy and it's not used into the trails, it can be picked up as a hitch or put into the forwarder and then moved to the landing and utilized. Versus going back and forth with this material, if you can process it in the woods, stash it out there, it'd be great. So it's about planning ahead of time, having these areas of stashing sites identified in the contract, identified on the map, and then having the right materials on hand on the landing. The alternative is downtime, right? If we don't address soft spots, headache spots ahead of time, you're going to be hauling brush back and forth from the landing back into that site. You may get shut down. There's loss of productivity, again, moving that material around. There's also the loss of site productivity too. When we kind of pierce that soil layer and it gets all mucked up, that's really changing the functionality of that soil, at least on that footprint that's right there. And you may even change the hydrology that's going on. So the less we can do, the better. And then, kind of the last point there is erosion, at least in New Hampshire with fines, and you just, mud on your face, right? It doesn't look good during the process. And I understand that sometimes you gotta, making sausages can be pretty rough sometimes, but the idea is that if the wrong person comes at the wrong time, then, it just doesn't make you look good. So I tend to go through this process asking a few questions when kind of planning. Where's the water going to come from? Where's it going to go? So when we think about extreme rain events, obviously it's going to come from the sky, but when it hits that frozen skid trail, where's it going to go? It's going to go downhill, obviously. Will that pick up sediment and go down into your stream crossing? Also, where are the headache sites? Where are the soft spots that you have during the summer that in a normal winter are frozen? But if things thaw out, you're going to be in trouble. So kind of predicting where that water is going to come from. What's the risk? If it thaws and it's a little spot right here, you can tune that up with some brush and you're on your way. That's a pretty low risk. But if that main haul road is if it breaks up and it's soft, that's pretty risky. It's going to shut down your whole operation. So you want to make sure you kind of identify where the pinch points are in that flow of wood back to the landing. And then finally, what's going to happen when you leave, that closeout? Again, thinking about, is it just mulching down with some hay on top of some conservation mix? Is that enough? Or will that stuff also be blown out when that large rain event comes, a month from now? And so, kind of proposing like new BMPs. They're not new at all. They're just kind of using material in different ways. Again, I think the first one is planning ahead, thinking about, what could go wrong, even though it may not even go wrong. Collecting corduroy, again, that's that stashing of material throughout the harvest. Stashing, which is hard for me to say. Utilization of slash bars. Again, if you're working on frozen ground and there's a kind of a warm spell coming through and you don't want to impact the soil, the frozen trail that you have there, instead of digging down to install water bars on a temporary closeout for the site, build up with slash and logs and also using log barriers. On sensitive sites or sites that are close, or harvests that are close to sensitive sites, consider using contour felling, which is using logs to essentially act as water bars on, in patches and things like that. Timber mats, and also armoring the landing and trails. And I'll kind of give some examples of each of these. So the first one is kind of predicting that unpredictable weather, or planning for it. And there's the concept of safe wood and risky wood, or not so safe wood, where you have this area of safe wood, which means the ground's good. The ground's good no matter what. It could be a good mud lot, well drained. You're not going to run into problems if you lose frozen ground. That's an area that you can kind of save, keep in your back pocket, so that when the ground does break up, you can kind of move to that site and still keep on working. The not so safe wood is those areas that, there's a tricky stream crossing. There may be some soft spots. It's flat. It needs to be frozen ground. And if that doesn't stay frozen, it's going to be pretty risky. You're going to make a mess. So if you can attack essentially the not so safe wood first, when the conditions are right, you essentially can get rid of that risk if the ground does start to thaw out, and then you can go work in your safe wood. Of course, it takes planning. You got to cut the trails in. You got to get over there. But those are things to consider about where are the areas that I can work anytime. Where are the areas where are very special to work in. And it may be that the whole site is risky, right? And so then you got to think about, well, we just need the right conditions to get in there. But there may be sites on larger sales that have both of these out there on the landscape. This comes from Keith Canodio at UMaine, so I won't take credit for that one. Collecting corduroy, again, the idea of, I've seen situations where you have these large ruts, really wet, the ground's broken up, and the logger's going back and forth, putting in slash into these really wet sites, and they'll go out, grab a hitch, come back over, and repeat. It seems like the slash just keeps on disappearing over time, or just there's a bottomless pit. And if the minute that started to break up, it could be tuned up with having that stashed corduroy on site. You spend a little time laying that corduroy down, and then you can kind of float above with that, in theory, right? And again, I should have said this earlier, these aren't critiques of the logging profession. These aren't critiques of what's going on in the woods. These are just considerations for you to take back with you. And so I understand that these things happen. It's happened to me in the past as well. Stashing slash, again, the idea of using slash, having these piles strategically placed, in the harvest area, and also on the landing too, by having these having them available so that you can put these in strategic spots right away instead of going back and forth to the landing and making all those trips. So with here, we think about the potential to put some slash along a skid trail here. I'm not sure if you can see. There's a butt log. There's a log. I think I got a pointer here. Oh, sorry. A good extension forester always a pointer. There's a crossing that's right here that you can't see. It's kind of buried in there. And so this is a frozen haul road. There's some a lot of mud and debris that's on top of that ice. And so you can imagine that if frozen conditions, but then 4 inches of rain come the next week, that has a potential for that mud ice to get picked up by the rain and just flow right down into the stream. And so if that's the forecast, one consideration would be to just add slash that's there on the side. So as you're cutting in that road, as you're moving stuff around, slash is stored on either side of the stream crossing, and that when you know that it's time to move out for a week or so, or just shut down and let that storm blow through, and then let things freeze up again. Prior to leaving, you would actually make some slash bars or some slash filter strips on both sides of that crossing, just to catch some of that material. And if you don't use it, you can leave it there, and you have some nice little brush piles and things like that too. So here's a case of a recently closed out sale, and about 15% slope on each side. And so, they essentially pulled the skidder bridge out, and there's a good kind of slash filter strip on both sides that they use as an abutment and as a ramp to build up to the skidder bridge. But other things to consider would be additional water bars, especially on those steeper slopes as you go up on both sides. That's those lines there. Sometimes with skidder bridges, there's some good log abutments that you would just leave on site as kind of a final catch. That again act as a so-called water bar, but with the log. As the logs and the water bars are tipped to one side, you would use those pile of slash on each side of the stream as a filter strip, so that if you're kicking a lot of water off into the side into the forest, you still run the risk of shooting water into the stream. And just having slash and material just to slow that water down allows for the things to drop out and then finally get to the stream. And then, there could be a potential if slash wasn't used as a ramp for the abutment for the skidder bridge, you could install that down at the bottom, but also on the top as well, just as a final measure. So just using that material to essentially build up and to really kind of armor the site against heavy rains and prevent sedimentation to that stream. That's a lot. That's a lot to do on that one site, but just throwing out those considerations. And so again, this was a site that was shut down for a bit, just a water bar cut in prior to the crossing that's there. Log barriers, we see, I know a lot of folks have done kind of trout restoration work. Logs in the stream act just like logs on land. They hold things back when water hits them, especially on slopes. And so if you imagine in the stream, logs, they catch a bunch of sticks and leaves and keep things from falling or flowing down the stream. On our landscape, at least in my neck of the woods, we've been harvesting timber for a very long time. So there's not much coarse material out there, especially small ones or large pieces. And so, our forest floors are, they're it's a duff layer. And, recently with more and more heavy storms, we've seen just kind of the sheet flow of water, of rainwater across down slopes, ripping out the duff layer and going down to the soil. Prior to essentially our original forest, let's say, there was just big trees grew up and they died, and these acted as, these log barriers, especially on steep slopes. And so log barriers are pretty handy. Again, just using that as the final defense against against a heavy flow of water before a stream crossing. There's an example of one left behind right there. You can make the case of using slash on the other side to kind of build out that slash bar, and then where the question mark is, maybe consider putting another log there, or a water bar if the conditions are right. Skidder bridges, often used by a profession are excellent. New Hampshire, we can go bank to bank without a permit. You don't have to worry about it because you're not impacting the wetland. The great thing about skidder bridges is that they utilize logs a lot of times, like I said earlier, to use as abutments. And so those logs, you can kind of plan ahead, say, well, I'll use some low grade. Well, most of the time you're already using low-grade material for that, but these logs will stay behind. I'll use that as the infrastructure, my BMP infrastructure, following closeout. Just example, more logs here. Yeah, here's that example of that sheet flow. You see, this was in December. We had a monster storm roll through central New Hampshire in December, all rain, and the next day we went out in the woods, and there's just this, not a road, not a path. It's just water flowing downhill. It's kind of crazy. And so, you can consider using the concept of contour felling on steep slopes and rich sites where you really want to maintain that soil. You want to keep the soil on site. And you want to keep that soil productive, close to sensitive areas, and then just think about unpredicted disturbances. So we've all seen it in the woods. This is just a small piece of coarse weight material on the ground, but that downhill slope, below it, there's not much, but above it, that log is catching material. It's not... I'm not going to win any awards showing this, but the idea is that, this is pretty basic here. And so, we can see some missed opportunities on a site like this. This is a very enriched site in New Hampshire, which is like a moderate site in Vermont. And there were some logs and actually a lot of slash that was left behind. And so that material could have been spread and used in different ways. And again, not critiquing, just considerations, because I know I'm not an equipment operator, and I know it's very difficult to move stuff with that. But just things to think about, where what's going to happen after I leave here. We got some logs going cross slope on the ground here, close to a sensitive site next to a water body. Again, obviously that the log closest to us there's some airspace between that, but over time that will sag and fill in, and the idea is you're kind of maintaining some structure on the forest floor that will intercept heavy flow of water. The example of the individuals trying to do some good work here with some conservation mix and some mulching on top of that. The idea is that maybe there was some slash stashed, where you could actually use the slash to mulch on top of your mulching hay as well. The idea, again, creating some canopy above that area, so that when there is heavy rains, the rain's intercepted, the rains slow down, there's less erosive forces that happen on that slope. I mentioned this earlier with landings too, which, landings a lot of times are just left to do their own thing. That can be great, especially for turtles and, and turkeys and things like that with that bare ground. But that bare ground can move. And so thinking about, water bars, even on the flattest areas, just have some spacing. Seeding, that can take care of that issue of that bare ground. I've seen round bales unrolled across, going cross slope, acting as essentially just I guess it's a hay bar, using wood chips and slash and leaving the woody material in place, again, to create that structure on the forest floor to slow down the movement of water. I think we saw these photos again, a very sandy, very dry site. You can just see that rippling of material over time, just sloping down. Nothing major, but it moves. Corduroy, timber mats, armoring the site. And so there's the traditional use of corduroy, we all use it. And then there's big corduroy too, right? Lots of I'm talking 12-inch logs, 12-inch logs, big pieces of material, just so the machinery can stay above soft sites. The idea is just to stay above the soil. prevent rutting, prevent compaction, prevent changing hydrology. We've seen these before. Power company workers, line workers use these things all the time, right? They have a different payment structure, but these are used quite a bit. But timber mats can actually be very effective at keeping mud off of the tarmac. The idea is that you're keeping your trucks on top of the timber mats, and you're keeping them out of the mud. Here's an example of a landing set up with a cut to length. You get the forwarder coming in the back there, unloading, and then the log trucks would be backing in onto those timber mats and not getting into that muddy mess that's right there. Armoring the site. So this is some pretty big material that's laid out on the main haul road. If that haul road goes away or thaws out, that shuts down the operation. And so the idea is to essentially, paving the main skid trail with pulp with that too. If the pulp is kept out of the mud, if you're staying above the soil, there's potential to recover some of that material. And just, run through a chipper or bring it to a yard that won't be happy because it's so muddy, but, there's potential to reclaim that material. And then just other examples of just, pretty extreme and pretty lengthy skid trails armored with big corduroy or big timbers there. I think this is from Wendy. This is the Golden Road, I think it's called. But lots and lots of corduroy, but it got the job done, right? This I just got yesterday from, I'm sorry for all the text, but this was a job that was over the span of 3 weeks. The contractor used a bunch of big corduroy. It's hard to see in this picture here, but underneath the small fines is actually large 10, 12-inch corduroy that's underneath there. And they allowed to pull that volume out there in 3 weeks with no issues. And they just closed out recently. So they had the winter in southern New Hampshire. That was just horrible for logging, but with armoring the site with corduroy, and also they used 400 feet of timber mats on the site too, and they just got the material out and got out. And so, obviously there's a huge cost to doing these things. You got to get the mats, you got to move them, you got to install them, you got to take them out. But I don't know what the answer is, but there's also a huge cost of spinning your tires in the mud. There's a huge cost of downtime, idle time, not producing anything too. So I think we need to kind of weigh those two things. And there's also there's other environmental costs that we don't think about in terms of hydrology and site productivity when we're busting through the soil like that. There you go, another timber mat for you. Getting close to the end here, where we're kind of getting into the oddities of water control here, but when you think about our truck roads too, I mean, a lot of our truck roads are in good shape. They're beefed up, maybe less stone in them, but they run the risk of being frozen with dirt and other material on top. And so when we're talking about, especially in the wintertime, having that condition, frozen truck road, mud or dirt right on top of that. Again, if you get that rainstorm that comes on, hits the ice, that mud and dirt's picked up, goes out onto the tarmac, goes out into the culvert, you run into issues. And so as a temporary closeout, consider these things, having these in the utility truck, your utility trailer, or in the truck, these wattles or compost socks, that's there. There's the straw wattles driven down into the ground with large spikes. Just the whole thing's on site. You could also use logs, right? There's a lot of logs on hand right next to the landing. But the idea is just, keeping, not so much losing the road, because it could be frozen, well crowned, and well drained. But the idea is that, you just want to make sure that if there's any material on that it's not kind of flowing out into other places that aren't going on. And my favorite, the old silt fence, again, that's kind of extreme measure, but they work, and that could be an option for you as well on those sites. So just a couple scenarios here. I showed you that safe wood, not so safe wood scenario. I think, so we just went through a bunch of kind of these BMPs that to consider, to think about. So here's a site that we have here. There's that safe wood site. We're going to do some patch cuts or large openings in there, and then there's like the not so safe site that we're working on. So some considerations to think about, and starting in the top left there, on the landing, we may have a good cache of timber mats there. We actually may armor the site with timber mats, right? Having that site so the trucks don't get their wheels wet. They can get in and out, easy access, right on the road, right there. We may have the wattles or socks stored on site in the trailer, and then also a large, just a stockpile of corduroy or material that you've identified that you're not going to run through the chipper just yet. It's just there just in case you need it to grab and go out in the woods. The main haul road, which is below the landing here, I think, yeah, right here. We may consider armoring that with mats as well, or large corduroy too, just so that site is always able to carry machinery. Even if it does start to thaw out, you can still get wood coming out of there. And then on the safe site, if we're going to do some large patch cuts, maybe it's on a steep slope, maybe there's a water resource below those patch cuts, we may consider doing some contour felling, right? So just laying that out. There's a kind of a permanent stream crossing that we would have here. The idea is we have a skidder bridge with logs for abutments. If we needed to pull that skidder bridge out, even if there's a larger storm coming, maybe we use those log abutments as log bars just to kind of act as a barrier that's there. Maybe on that site as well, we have a large stash of corduroy, just in case, and also slash for, using for slash barriers, and also for filters as well. And then, identified in the contract and identified with the contractor is that you have these large corduroy installed maybe on really sensitive sites or sites that if they did break up, they're going to become a problem. So you're kind of planning ahead with that. And then also stashing that material as needed and appropriate. So yeah, those are just kind of like just mashing all those things into a super expensive BMP project, right? Yeah. And then just finally, case study here in New Hampshire. You can see that here there's we got a pond that drains out. Sorry, this is really slanted for me. But then you have a stream that kind of runs down this way, and a bunch of braided streams that go into that main stream. So that red dot that you see there is a timber bridge, is a skidder bridge, and then the blue dots that are scattered throughout are pole forwards or some sort of temporary crossing that would be out there. And so very very tricky site to work off of. A lot of pitfalls. Frozen ground with snow, you probably could operate this very quickly, right? You just run this pretty good. Looks like it's all sloping downhill with one major crossing, good to go. But winter like this, probably not even able to get on there, or just a good thaw, you have some nightmares. So in this case, there was a February thaw after some good freezing. This is the equipment they're using to cut the length. They had their main bridge right there. They had to pull out in February, so the idea is that they actually threw some slash kind of along the road, just recognizing that that's a potential for the water to flow down and cause issues. Thinking ahead though, knowing that this site is this could be a headache if things start to thaw, they laid out corduroy even on sites where corduroy wasn't necessary at the time. So they're thinking ahead, saying, if this does thaw, I have corduroy here just so I can float above it, versus reacting to the mud. They're just trying not to prevent mud instead of reacting to it. And again, same thing, laying out corduroy again where it's going to be a headache. They knew the site, they planned ahead with that. And yeah, you can see all these little spots, essentially the blue spots, and then where the braid stream is. That's where the headaches were. Also on that site, they did previous management. There's this deflated approach, as I call it. It's a lot of kind of compaction leading up to the crossing. So this is where the previous crossing was. They didn't use it because that would have posed a lot more work to get that tuned up, and they probably wouldn't be able to put a skidder bridge across that span. And so they just totally avoided that area, avoided the trouble spots, and actually installed a pretty good, wrong way, sorry, pretty good skidder bridge there just further upstream where it went from a clean bank to bank scenario. In this case, they pulled the panels because when they pulled out in February, not knowing when they were going to be able to get back in there, and they left them there just on site, and they would put them back when they get back. And they did the same thing with sorry about that. They did the same thing with the pole forwards, just allowing for the small streams to flow freely and not be plugged up by the poles, especially if there's a big pulse of rain that comes through. And that pole material is left there so that when they did come back, they could just pop it back in and go. So again, finally, thinking about where that water is going to go after you leave, and this is kind of a scenario here where you have this fine haul road here with a crossing. When you pull that crossing, where are things going to go? And so, where will the water come from? Uphill or from the sky? And where's it going to go? Downhill and into the stream. And so, how can you either slow that water down, reduce the risk, and also what is the risk that's there? And I think most importantly now too is thinking about what happens to the site after you leave. And so when you when you do that closeout, is the BMPs that you're installing enough for the weather that we have been seeing? We've been finding, yeah, for the most part, yes, but there may be some little things to tune up here and there, and these, I think, are some considerations that you can use when thinking about if your BMPs are enough. So again, thanks to these folks, I remember now. Thanks to these folks, again, huge effort on not just mine, but all the folks that contributed to this document, and also the logging contractors that like to show what the good work that they're doing out there to try to avoid these problems. Yeah, so with that, my contact information and where you can find this document, so thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We got time for a few questions for Steve in the back.
Yeah, I think these are all really good practices and stuff, and I own, of course, a consultant, I also own a logging company, and I can tell you we've been doing these for many years, and I'll just give you an anecdote from this winter. All those techniques that you alluded to, like we used on the site, and you said it's a very expensive BMP project, right? So I'm wondering who do we want to pay for that? Because I can tell you I paid $2,500 in stumpage to a landowner off this job that we're only able to work on for a month because of the weather. And the amount of BMPs that we installed probably exceeded $7,000 to $8,000.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question for the folks on Zoom. Talking about the cost of these BMPs and who should pay for these things. And I know that I've been working with our local NRCS, New Hampshire NRCS, to kind of talk about these practices, about that planning process. So that's a pretty big burden, though, for a landowner to have that planning up ahead, and it's a long time frame. But I think part of this may be the conversation with the landowner to talk about expectations and how this is going to happen. I don't have an easy answer for you for that, but you're right, though, it does cost a lot, and if we're going to continue to work in the woods, I think we need to come up with these practices that are just try to figure it out. Yep. Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Yes?
A couple of things. One, some states actually pay loggers to put in BMPs. If you're in New York State, in the New York City watershed, they will subsidize the cost of BMPs to a private logger like yourself. The second thing I wanted to add was that the Inflation Reduction Act has given the Forest Service funding for temporary skidder bridges. And I know Maine has received $150,000 or so. New Hampshire, same. Massachusetts, the same. So they do have new inventories of skidder bridges that are available, sometimes to purchase, sometimes for rent, depends on the state. That grant opportunity is open again this year. If you Google U.S. Forest Service temporary skidder bridges, you'll find the grant opportunity, and you can get some money. You have to go through the state first, but they can sub it out to a nonprofit organization to get some funding for that. But the last thing I wanted to say was that you mentioned permitting earlier in your talk, and the one thing you got to remember here is that we have a silvicultural exemption from the Clean Water Act, so we don't need to get permits. We don't need no stinking permits to do these kinds of jobs. But if things go to hell in a hurry and we ended up getting a lot of complaints and violations, that could change. So using BMPs keeps us out of a lot of permitting hot water.
Thank you.
There's a question after.
Go in the back.
You were talking about skidder bridges, and there was an area in which that was already impacted, but it didn't seem feasible to go and use that area. At what threshold does it make sense to impact a new area? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, so when does it make sense to put in a new crossing? That you're asking.
You've already impacted the area. Why
Yeah.
not use it, but putting in a new impact area, where is that, can you offer anything?
Sure, yeah. Just to clear up one thing, stream crossings are a permitted process, so pull forwards and things like that, that's an impact to the wetlands, so that's a permitted process, in New Hampshire at least, in Vermont as well, so I just make that clear. For certain crossings. So, and then, so the example I gave you right there, that would have been a dredge and fill permit to fill in the area that has now become a wetland, just so you could get the skidder bridge across. You know, you get that span there. So in that scenario, it's a lot easier just to do a non-permitted process with the skidder bridge, go bank to bank in New Hampshire, than it is to do, you know, thousands of dollars of permitting to do a dredge and fill, just to fill that in. So that, to me, it has a lot of impact. Just kind of let that lie. So that's kind of my metric there. If there's an old crossing that's still usable, yeah, I would definitely use it, and, you know, that's where the impact is. But if you're going to create more mud or more issues or more, it's going to cost more, then I'd essentially try to find a better site. But sometimes you can't find a better site either. That might be the only spot. Yep. Yep. Good.
Got time for one more question. Keith?
I'll just throw one that we're excited to try out here. David Wilcox, the watershed forester, and Rick Dyer found well casings from the oil and gas industry in Texas. They get industrially cleaned, sending up 90 of them for vented fords and reusable culverts to distribute, kind of like we do the bridges.
Great. What's the diameter?
10 and 12.
Thank you.
50,000 for 90 of them.
Sounds like a deal.
Delivered. From
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much, Steve. Switch over. We're doing the Zoom switch over here.